She tried to block me from letting her friend in. I went against her wishes, and I'd do it all over again. What if the woman you married, the one you trusted with everything, was secretly live-streaming her affair and mocking you to her friends online? For me, it started with the smell of burnt coffee and my wife's expensive perfume. She thought I was too oblivious to notice, but she was about to learn that sometimes the quiet ones are just taking notes. The smell of burnt coffee and my wife's lies filled our kitchen that Tuesday morning. I'm Joel Harper, 45 years old, former journalist turned home inspector, and apparently the last person in Millbrook, Maine, to know that my marriage had become a work of fiction. I'm heading to book club tonight, Fiona announced, not looking up from her phone. She was dressed like she was going to seduce Hemingway himself, a black dress that cost more than my monthly truck payment, heels that could puncture a tire, and enough perfume to knock out a moose. What book are you reading this week? I asked, genuinely curious. In our 15 years of marriage, I'd never seen Fiona crack anything heavier than a restaurant menu. Her fingers froze over her phone screen. It's contemporary fiction. You wouldn't know it. Try me, I said. I used to read for a living, remember? She finally looked at me, her green eyes cold as a Maine winter. I'm not going to explain what my evening plans are to you, Joel. I'm a grown woman. All right, I said, because what else could I say? But something in her tone made my journalist instincts twitch like a broken smoke detector. After she left in a cloud of expensive perfume and attitude, I found myself alone with my suspicions and a sink full of dishes. That's when I noticed her purse, forgotten on the counter like evidence at a crime scene. I'm not proud of what I did next, but 15 years of marriage had taught me that sometimes the truth hides in the most mundane places. Inside her wallet, tucked behind her credit cards like a guilty secret, was a receipt from the Anchor Inn, the fanciest hotel bar in town. 2 drinks, expensive wine, charged at 9 p.m. last Thursday. Last Thursday, when she'd supposedly been at book club discussing women's literature until 11 o'clock. My hands shook as I photographed the receipt with my phone. The Anchor Inn wasn't exactly known for its literary discussions. It was known for discreet encounters and overpriced cocktails served to people who had something to hide. I sat at our kitchen table, staring at the receipt on my phone screen, feeling like I just discovered a crack in the foundation of my life. The coffee maker gurgled its death rattle, and somewhere in the distance, a foghorn moaned across Millbrook Bay. That's when my neighbor, Mrs. Delaney, knocked on our back door. She was 73 years old, built like a fire hydrant, and had the investigative skills of a retired FBI agent. Nothing happened in our neighborhood without her knowledge and subsequent commentary. "Joel, honey," she said, bustling into my kitchen without invitation. "I hope you don't mind me saying, but I couldn't help noticing Fiona has been keeping some unusual hours." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Delaney poured herself a cup of my burnt coffee, like she owned the place. "Well, last Thursday night, I was up with my insomnia. You know how it is. And I saw her car pull into the driveway at nearly midnight. But here's the thing, dear. She didn't come from the direction of town where those book clubs usually meet. She came from Lakeshore Drive. Lakeshore Drive. That's where the fancy houses sat like monuments to success, overlooking the water with their perfect lawns and perfect lives. Where Graham Dalton lived. Graham Gray Dalton. Fiona's college boyfriend. The one who had dumped her senior year to marry his professor's daughter. The one who'd moved back to Millbrook 6 months ago after his divorce, buying the biggest house on the lake, and proceeding to act like he owned the entire town. "Mrs. Delaney," I said carefully, "are you sure about the direction?" She nodded vigorously, her gray curls bouncing. "Honey, I've lived in this house for 47 years. I know which direction is which, and I know the sound of a guilty conscience when I hear it. That girl's car engine was running quieter than usual, like she was trying not to wake anyone." After Mrs. Delaney left with promises to keep an eye on things, I sat alone with my thoughts and the growing certainty that my marriage was circling the drain faster than autumn leaves in a storm gutter. I pulled out my laptop and did what any self-respecting former journalist would do. I started investigating. Facebook, Instagram, the digital breadcrumbs that people leave without thinking. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Fiona's friend, Leia, had posted photos from book club 3 weeks ago. The setting wasn't some cozy living room with wine and paperbacks. It was Gray's house. I recognized a distinctive stone fireplace and floor-to-ceiling windows from the real estate listing I'd seen when he'd moved back to town. But here's what really got my attention. In the background of one photo, barely visible, but unmistakably there, was Fiona. She was laughing at something off camera, her head thrown back in genuine joy. I hadn't seen her laugh like that in months, maybe years. The photo was tagged with several names I recognized, the usual suspects from Fiona's social circle. But there was one name I didn't recognize, Becca Morrison. I clicked on her profile and found something interesting. Becca was apparently some kind of social media influencer, documenting small-town drama for her TikTok channel called Millbrook Confessions. Her bio read, "Spilling tea in a town full of secrets. Every drama has two sides. I show you both." I spent the next hour scrolling through Becca's content, and what I found made my blood run cold. She had been documenting what she called the Book Club Chronicles, a series of videos that supposedly showed the real social dynamics of Millbrook's elite women. The videos were carefully edited to avoid showing faces clearly, but the voices were unmistakable. In one video from 2 weeks ago, I heard Fiona's laugh again, but this time I also heard her voice. Joel has no idea. He's so wrapped up in his little inspection reports and his beer that he wouldn't notice if I brought Gray home for dinner. Another voice, Leia's, I was pretty sure, responded, "Are you going to tell him? Why would I ruin a good thing?" Fiona's voice was cold, calculating. Gray gives me everything Joel can't. Excitement, passion, a future that doesn't involve crawling under houses for a living. I closed the laptop and sat in the gathering darkness of our kitchen, feeling like I'd just been punched in the gut by reality. My wife wasn't just having an affair. She was mocking our entire marriage for the entertainment of her friends and the internet. The foghorn sounded again across the bay, and I made a decision that would change everything. If Fiona wanted to play games, I'd show her what a real game looked like. After all, I'd spent 20 years as an investigative journalist before the newspaper industry collapsed. I knew how to dig up dirt, how to connect dots, and how to tell a story that people would never forget. But first, I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. I needed to see this book club for myself. The next Thursday, I was ready. I borrowed my sister Karen's Honda Civic, nondescript and forgettable, perfect for what I had in mind. I parked 3 blocks away from Gray's house on Lakeshore Drive and walked through the woods that bordered his property, feeling like a character in one of those spy novels I used to read. Gray's house was everything mine wasn't: modern, expensive, and designed to impress. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed off a living room that looked like a furniture showroom, all clean lines and neutral colors. Through those windows, I could see the book club in action. There were 6 women total, including Fiona. They sat in a circle with wine glasses, but I didn't see a single book. What I saw instead made my hands clench into fists. Fiona was sitting next to Gray on his white leather couch, her hand resting on his thigh like she owned it. She was wearing the black dress from Tuesday night, the one she claimed was just for book club. Gray had his arm around her shoulders, and they were both laughing at something Leia was saying. I took out my phone and started recording. The journalist in me knew that evidence was everything, and the husband in me needed proof of what I was seeing. Through the window, I watched my wife of 15 years act like a completely different person, animated, flirtatious, alive in a way she never was at home. That's when I noticed Becca Morrison in the corner, her phone propped up on a tripod, obviously recording everything for her social media empire. She was younger than the other women, maybe 30, with the kind of carefully curated appearance that screamed influencer. She moved around the group like a documentary filmmaker, capturing angles and reactions. I couldn't hear what they were saying from outside, but their body language told the story clearly enough. This wasn't a book club. This was a social gathering centered around Gray's triumphant return to Millbrook, and my wife was his prize exhibit. Around 9:30, the group started to break up. I watched in the woods as the women said their goodbyes, air kissing, and making plans for next week. But Fiona didn't leave with the others. She stayed behind as Gray closed the door, and through those massive windows, I watched him pull her into his arms. I turned away before I could see more. I'd seen enough. The drive home was a blur of anger and planning. By the time I pulled into our driveway, I had the beginnings of a strategy. If Fiona wanted to destroy our marriage, that was her choice. But she wasn't going to do it quietly, and she wasn't going to make me look like a fool in the process. I was already in bed, pretending to sleep, when Fiona came home at 11:43 p.m. She moved through our bedroom like a ghost, trying not to wake me, but I could smell Gray's cologne on her clothes. How was book club? I asked quietly in the darkness. She froze at the bathroom door. It was fine. We discussed character development. Sounds fascinating. What book? There was a long pause. You wouldn't know it. It's very contemporary. I'm sure it is, I said and rolled over to face the wall. The next morning, I put my plan into action. My first stop was the Millbrook Literary Cafe, a combination bookstore and bar that served as the town's unofficial gossip headquarters. My old newspaper buddy, Sam Kowalski, worked there as a bartender. And if anyone knew the real story about Gray Dalton's return to town, it would be Sam. Joe, Sam called out when I walked in. He was polishing glasses behind the bar, looking like a character from a noir novel with his rolled-up sleeves and knowing smirk. What brings you to my den of literary iniquity? I need information, Sam, about Gray Dalton. Sam's smirk widened. Ah, the prodigal son returns. What do you want to know? Everything. Why he came back. What he's up to. Who he's seeing. Sam poured me a coffee and leaned across the bar conspiratorially. Well, officially, he came back to be closer to his aging parents and to reconnect with his roots. Unofficially, his divorce in Boston was messy as hell. His ex-wife took him for half of everything, including his share of the consulting firm they built together. So, he's not as wealthy as he pretends. He's comfortable, but not rich. The house is mortgaged to the hilt, and he's been throwing money around like he's trying to buy back his reputation. Speaking of which, Sam glanced around and lowered his voice. There are rumors about his social life. Something about a married woman. My coffee suddenly tasted like acid. What kind of rumors? The kind that make good people shake their heads and bad people take notes. Word is he's been hosting these cultural gatherings at his place. Book clubs, wine tastings, that sort of thing. But the real attraction isn't literature, if you know what I mean. Before I could respond, the cafe door chimed and Becca Morrison walked in. She was even younger in person, with the kind of confidence that came from having thousands of social media followers. She ordered a complicated coffee drink and set up her laptop at a corner table, immediately starting to edit video on what looked like professional software. That's Becca Morrison, Sam said quietly. She's been documenting every bit of drama in this town for her online thing. Some people love the attention, others... He shrugged. Let's just say she's not welcome at every establishment in town. An idea began forming in my mind. Sam, do you think Becca would be interested in a really good story? Depends on the story. Why? Because I think I'm about to give her the biggest scoop of her career. I approached Becca's table with the confidence of someone who had nothing left to lose. Excuse me, are you Becca Morrison? She looked up from her laptop, immediately wary. Depends who's asking. Joel Harper. I think you know my wife, Fiona. Her expression changed instantly, becoming more alert. Oh, you're... Yes, I know Fiona. She's mentioned you. I'm sure she has. Listen, I have a proposition for you. How would you like exclusive access to the biggest drama this town has seen in years? Becca closed her laptop slowly. What kind of drama? The kind that involves lies, betrayal, and people who think they're too smart to get caught. The kind that would make your followers lose their minds. She studied my face carefully. Are we talking about what I think we're talking about? We're talking about the truth. The real truth about your book club friends and their extracurricular activities. I can give you evidence, documentation, and a front row seat to watch it all fall apart. Becca's eyes lit up with the hunger of a true storyteller. What do you want in return? Justice, and maybe a little revenge. We talked for another hour, and by the time I left the cafe, We had an agreement. Becca would continue documenting the book club activities, but now she'd be doing it with purpose. She'd capture everything. The lies, the deception, the casual cruelty of people who thought they were untouchable. In return, I would provide her with information and access that would make her the premier chronicler of Millbrook's downfall. Because that's what this was going to be. Not just the end of my marriage, but the complete destruction of the social circle that had enabled it. My phone buzzed with a text from Fiona. Working late tonight. Don't wait up. I smiled grimly and typed back, no problem. I'll find something to keep me busy. Saturday morning found me at Millbrook Marina, pretending to work on my small sailboat, while actually watching Gray Dalton's show off his new yacht to a group of admirers. The boat was a sleek 30-footer that probably cost more than my house, and Gray was clearly enjoying being the center of attention. I'd been planning this encounter for 3 days, ever since my conversation with Becca. She'd already provided me with some interesting intelligence. Apparently, Gray had been bragging to the book club about his conquest of Fiona, describing their affair in terms that made my blood boil. She's always been the one that got away, he'd said in one of Becca's recordings. Now I get to prove that I was the better choice all along. So when I saw him at the marina surrounded by his usual crowd of sycophants, I decided it was time for a little direct confrontation. I walked over to his group, carrying a cooler full of the fish I'd caught earlier that morning. Gray Dalton, I called out with false enthusiasm. I heard you were back in town. He turned, and I saw the moment of recognition, followed immediately by calculation. Joel Harper, how nice to see you. Likewise. I was just telling my wife how excited I was to meet the famous Gray Dalton. She speaks about you constantly. The group around him shifted uncomfortably. They could sense the tension, even if they didn't understand it yet. Does she now? Gray's smile was sharp as a knife. Fiona always was expressive. Oh, she is. Especially when she comes home from book club. She's always so energized afterward. Really gets her blood pumping. If you know what I mean. Gray's eyes narrowed. He was beginning to understand that this wasn't a friendly encounter. Book club can be very stimulating. We discuss all sorts of things. Character development, plot twists, climactic scenes. I bet you do. In fact, I'd love to join sometime. I'm very interested in contemporary fiction. I'm afraid our book club is invitation only. Very exclusive. Well, that's disappointing, but I understand. Some stories are too private to share with just anyone. The tension was thick enough to cut with a boat hook. The other people in Gray's group were starting to back away, sensing that this conversation was heading somewhere dangerous. That's when Gray made his mistake. He stepped closer to me, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was an intimidating whisper. Listen, Joel, I think we both know what this is really about. And I think we both know that Fiona has made her choice. Maybe it's time you accepted that and moved on with dignity. I looked down at the cooler in my hands, then back at Gray's smug face. You know what, Gray? You're absolutely right. Fiona has made her choice, and now I'm going to make mine. I opened the cooler and pulled out the biggest striped bass I caught that morning. A beautiful 5-pound fish that was still dripping with ice water. Before Gray could react, I slapped him across the face with it. The sound was magnificent, a wet, meaty smack that echoed across the marina like a gunshot. Gray staggered backward. Fish scales stuck to his cheek, ice water dripping from his perfectly styled hair. What the hell is wrong with you? He sputtered, but I was already reaching into his jacket pocket. In the confusion, I managed to grab his phone, an iPhone in an expensive leather case. Oops, I said, palming it smoothly. Looks like you dropped something. Gray was too busy wiping fish slime off his face to notice. The crowd around us had grown, drawn by the commotion. I could see people taking photos and videos with their phones. By evening, this would be all over social media. You're insane, Gray shouted. I'm calling the police. For what? Attack with a deadly bass? Good luck with that. I picked up my cooler and started walking away. Give my regards to the book club, Gray. Tell them I'm looking forward to the next chapter. I made it halfway to my truck before I heard Gray shouting behind me, but I didn't turn around. I had what I'd come for, his phone, and more importantly, a public humiliation that would have people talking for weeks. Back at home, I connected Gray's phone to my laptop and started exploring. He hadn't bothered with much security. Apparently, he thought he was too important for anyone to mess with him. What I found in his messages and photos made me sick to my stomach, but it also gave me exactly what I needed. There were dozens of text conversations with Fiona going back months, photos that I won't describe in detail, but that made it clear their affair had been going on much longer than I had suspected. But most damaging of all were the group chats. Gray had been sharing details of his conquest with a group of his male friends, describing Fiona in terms that would have made a sailor blush. He'd shared photos of her car in his driveway, screenshots of her texts, even recordings of her voice messages. But it wasn't just Gray. The group chat included conversations with Leia and other book club members, plotting ways to make me look foolish or unstable. They discussed having me followed, spreading rumors about my business, even trying to get me arrested on false charges. Joel's getting suspicious. Fiona had written in one message, "We need to be more careful, or we could just get rid of him." Leia had responded, "I know people who could make his life very difficult." I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. This wasn't just an affair anymore. This was a conspiracy to destroy my life, orchestrated by people I considered friends. That's when I noticed something interesting in Gray's photo gallery. There were dozens of pictures from the book club meetings, but they weren't the sanitized versions that made it onto social media. These were the real photos, showing people in compromising positions, having private conversations, revealing secrets they thought were safe. Gray had been documenting everything, probably as insurance or blackmail material. But now that documentation was in my hands, and I was going to put it to much better use. I spent the rest of the day organizing the evidence, creating a timeline of the affair and the conspiracy against me. By evening, I had enough material to destroy not just Gray and Fiona, but their entire social circle. My phone buzzed with a text from Fiona. "Working late tonight. Don't wait up." I smiled grimly and typed back, "No problem. I'll find something to keep me busy." Then I called Becca Morrison. "It's Joel. Are you ready for phase 2? What did you have in mind? How would you like to live stream the book club meeting tonight? I think your followers would find it very entertaining." "How are we going to do that?" "Leave that to me. Just be ready to go live at 9 o'clock. And Becca, you might want to warn your followers that tonight's content is going to be adult-rated." The annual Millbrook Community Picnic was held every year in Riverside Park, a sprawling green space that overlooked the bay. It was the kind of wholesome small-town event that Norman Rockwell would have painted. Families with blankets and picnic baskets, kids running around with ice cream, local businesses setting up booths to show off their wares. It was also the perfect venue for what I had planned. I'd volunteer to help with the audio-visual setup for the evening's entertainment. A slideshow of local history photos and a presentation by the Historical Society. Being a former journalist had its advantages. People trusted me with technology and assumed I knew what I was doing. What they didn't know was that I'd spent the past week preparing a very different kind of presentation. Fiona was there, of course, playing the role of the perfect community member. She had brought a homemade potato salad and was wearing a sundress that made her look like an advertisement for small-town values. She was standing with Leia and the other book club members, laughing and chatting like they didn't have a care in the world. Gray was working the crowd like a politician, shaking hands and slapping backs, clearly enjoying his role as the town's returning son. He'd covered the fish scale scratches on his face with makeup, but I could still see the faint marks if I looked closely. "Joel," called Mayor Patricia Williams, a stout woman in her 60s who'd been running Millbrook for as long as anyone could remember. "Thank goodness you're here. We're having trouble with the projection system." "No problem, Patricia. I'll get it sorted out." I spent the next hour fixing the projection system, which mostly involved connecting my laptop to the main display and making sure everything was properly synced. The Historical Society slideshow was loaded and ready to go, but I'd made a few additions that weren't on the original program. As evening approached, people gathered on the grass in front of the temporary stage. Families spread out blankets. Teenagers clustered in groups, and the older residents claimed the folding chairs that had been set up in rows. It was the biggest crowd the picnic had seen in years. Ladies and gentlemen, Mayor Williams announced on the podium, we're going to start tonight's presentation with a slideshow of Millbrook's history, prepared by our Historical Society and presented by Joel Harper. I walked up to the podium, looking out at the crowd of familiar faces. Somewhere in the back, I spotted Becca Morrison with her camera set up, ready to document whatever was about to happen. We'd coordinated this carefully. She would be live streaming to her social media channels, ensuring that what happened tonight would reach far beyond the borders of our little town. Thank you, Mayor Williams, I said into the microphone. Tonight, we're going to take a journey through Millbrook's past and present. We'll see how our community has evolved, how relationships have changed, and how some people have stayed true to our town's values, while others... I paused, looking directly at Fiona and Gray. Well, others have chosen a different path. The slideshow began innocuously enough. Old photos of Millbrook's founding, the construction of the harbor, local businesses through the decades. The crowd settled in, expecting a pleasant trip down memory lane. But then the photos started to change. This next section, I announced, focuses on contemporary Millbrook social life, specifically the various clubs and organizations that bring our community together. The first photo showed the book club gathered at Leia's house, all smiles and wine glasses. Nothing suspicious there. But the second photo, taken from Gray's phone, showed the same group at his house with Fiona sitting much closer to Gray than any married woman should. I heard a few murmurs from the crowd, but most people didn't understand what they were seeing yet. Our local book club has been particularly active. I continued conversationally. They meet regularly to discuss literature, character development, and plot twists. Sometimes the plot twists are quite surprising. The next photo was more explicit. Gray and Fiona in an embrace on his couch, while the other book club members looked on with knowing smiles. This one got a bigger reaction from the crowd. I saw heads turning, people whispering to each other. From my position on the stage, I could see Fiona's face clearly. She'd gone pale as winter fog, her mouth hanging open in shock. Gray was frantically looking around, probably trying to figure out how to stop what was happening. Of course, I said, advancing to the next slide. Not all book club activities focus on literature. Sometimes they discuss more personal topics. For instance, how to conduct extramarital affairs without getting caught. This slide was a screenshot of the group chat with names clearly visible. Fiona's messages about hiding the affair, Leia's suggestions for getting rid of me, Gray's crude descriptions of his conquests, all of it blown up on a screen 20 feet wide for the entire town to see. The crowd was no longer murmuring. There were gasps, exclamations, and the sound of people getting to their feet. I could see Fiona's parents in the third row looking horrified. Gray's elderly mother was being comforted by the woman sitting next to her. "Joel, what are you doing?" Mayor Williams hissed from behind me, but I ignored her. This next section shows some of the book club's more creative writing exercises. I announced, for example, here are some text messages discussing how to frame an innocent person for unstable behavior. The screenshots kept coming. Message after message detailing conspiracy against me, the plans to destroy my reputation and my business, the casual cruelty of people who thought they were untouchable. That's when Gray finally snapped. He pushed through the crowd toward the stage, his face red with rage. "Turn that off. Turn it off right now." "I'm sorry, Gray," I said into microphone, "but the show must go on. After all, you always said you wanted to be the center of attention." He reached the stage and lunged for my laptop, but I had expected this. I grabbed the microphone stand and used it to block his approach, then stepped aside as he stumbled past me. "Security!" Mayor Williams was shouting, but the volunteer security for the picnic consisted of 3 retired guys who were more interested in watching the drama unfold than stopping it. Gray spun around and came at me again, but this time I was ready. I'd played football in high school and muscle memory kicked in. I grabbed him by the shoulders and spun him around, then gave him a hard shove that sent him stumbling off the stage and into the crowd. "As you can see," I said, straightening my shirt and returning to the microphone. Some people don't appreciate having their private lives made public, but I believe the community has a right to know when they're being deceived by people they trust. The final slides are the most damaging. Photos from Gray's phone showing him and Fiona in situations that left nothing to the imagination, along with his messages to friends describing her in terms that would have made an adult movie star blush. By the time the slideshow ended, half the crowd was on their feet, some shouting in outrage, others trying to get a better look at the screen. Fiona had disappeared entirely. I assumed she'd fled to her car. Gray was being restrained by two of the volunteer security guards, more to protect him from the angry crowd than to arrest him. Ladies and gentlemen, I said into the microphone one last time, thank you for attending tonight's presentation. I hope you found it educational. The book club will not be meeting next week. I packed up my laptop and walked off the stage, leaving chaos in my wake. As I headed for the parking lot, I could see Becca Morrison in the distance, still live streaming, providing commentary for her online audience about what they'd just witnessed. My phone was already buzzing with calls and text messages, but I ignored them all. I had one more stop to make before this night was over. The Millbrook Motor Lodge sat on the edge of town like a relic from a more optimistic era, when people took road trips and stayed in places with names like Motor Lodge. It had been updated over the years, but it still retained that classic motel aesthetic. Single-story buildings arranged around a parking lot with a neon sign that flickered in the main fog. I'd chosen it as a location for what I hope would be the final act of this drama, because it was public enough to be safe, but private enough for people to speak freely, and because there was something poetic about ending this sordid affair in a place that specialized in temporary accommodations. I'd sent the same message to Gray, Fiona, and Leia. Room 12, 10 p.m. Come alone. We need to talk. I arrived early and set up the room like a conference space, arranging the chairs in a circle and setting my laptop on the small table. Becca arrived at 9:45 as we'd arranged, with her camera equipment and a look of barely contained excitement. Are you sure about this? She asked as she set up her tripod. This could get ugly. It's already ugly, I replied. Now, we're just going to make it honest. Gray arrived first, at exactly 10 p.m. He'd changed clothes since the picnic and looked like he'd spent some time trying to salvage his appearance, but there was no hiding the defeat in his eyes. The man who'd strutted around town like he owned it now looked like what he really was, a middle-aged divorcee who bet everything on the wrong horse. What is this? He demanded when he saw Becca's camera set up. This is a final chapter, I said calmly. Sit down, Gray. Fiona arrived 5 minutes later, followed immediately by Leia. They clearly coordinated their arrival, probably hoping that numbers would give them some advantage. But when they saw the camera, they both froze in the doorway. Joel, what are you doing? Fiona asked. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished somehow. I'm ending this. I said, all of it. The lies, the deception, the conspiracy. We're going to have an honest conversation for once, and everyone in town is going to hear it. Leia backed toward the door. I'm not doing this. I'm leaving. Actually, you're not, I said and played a recording on my laptop. It was Leia's voice from one of Gray's recordings. We need to make Joel look unstable. If we can get him arrested or committed, Fiona can divorce him and take everything. Leia's face went white. Where did you get that? Gray's phone. Turns out he's been recording everything, probably as insurance. But now that insurance belongs to me. I gestured to the chairs. Sit down, all of you. We're going to clear the air once and for all. Reluctantly, they took seats in the circle I'd arranged. Becca adjusted her camera angle to capture everyone, and I could see the red light that indicated she was live streaming. Let's start with the basics, I said, looking directly at Fiona. How long has the affair been going on? She crossed her arms defensively. I don't have to answer that. Actually, you do. Because if you don't, I'll just play the recordings where you discuss it in detail. I clicked a button on my laptop, and Fiona's voice filled the room. Joel's so pathetic. He has no idea I've been seeing Gray for 6 months. Fiona's composure cracked. Fine. 6 months. Are you happy now? Not particularly, but I appreciate the honesty. Now, Gray, let's talk about your motivations. Was this about love, or was it about proving something? Gray shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I don't know what you mean. I played another recording, this one of Gray talking to his friends. Fiona was always the one that got away. Taking her from Joel is just proving that I was always the better man. So it was about ego. I said, "You didn't want Fiona. You wanted to win." "That's not true." Gray protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "And Leia," I continued, turning to Fiona's best friend, "what was your role in all this? Were you the mastermind or just an enthusiastic accomplice?" Leia looked around the room desperately, like a trapped animal. "I was just trying to help Fiona be happy. By plotting to have me arrested on false charges? That wasn't serious. We were just talking." I played another recording, this one of Leia discussing specific ways to frame me for domestic violence or mental instability. Her voice was calm, methodical, as she outlined a plan that could have destroyed my life completely. "Just talking," I repeated, "the way you were just talking when you discussed burning down my truck." The room fell silent, except for the hum of Becca's camera equipment. I could see the viewer count on her live stream climbing steadily. Word was spreading through social media, and people were tuning in to watch the real-time destruction of Millbrook's most prominent social circle. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, standing up and walking to the center of the circle. "Gray, you're going to sell your house and leave town tonight. I don't care where you go, but you're not staying in Millbrook. You can't make me do that." "Actually, I can, because if you don't, I'm going to release every photo, every recording, and every text message to the entire internet. Your ex-wife will get copies. Your business associates will get copies. Your elderly parents will get copies. How do you think that will work out for you?" Gray's face had gone ashen. He understood the threat. "Leia," I continued, "you're going to confess to your husband about your role in this conspiracy. You're going to tell him how you helped plan to destroy an innocent man's life for entertainment. And then you're going to leave Fiona alone forever. My husband will divorce me." Leia whispered, "Probably, but that's the consequence of your choices." Finally, I turned to Fiona. "And you, my dear wife, are going to sign divorce papers tonight. I've already had them drawn up. You get nothing. No alimony, no property settlement, nothing. You can keep your clothes and your car, and that's it." "That's not legal." Fiona protested. "I have rights." "You had rights when you were an innocent spouse, but infidelity is still grounds for divorce in Maine, and conspiracy to commit fraud voids any claim you might have had to marital assets. My lawyer assures me that the evidence I have will make this very simple." I pulled out the divorce papers and set them on the table. "Sign them, Fiona. Sign them now, or I release everything to the internet and let the whole world see what kind of person you really are." Fiona looked around the room, seeking support, but found none. Gray was staring at the floor, defeated. Leia was crying quietly. Even Becca, who had started this as an observer, looked uncomfortable with the level of destruction she was witnessing. "You're destroying people's lives." Fiona said quietly. "No," I replied. "I'm revealing the lives you've already destroyed. You did this to yourselves." She picked up the pen with shaking hands and signed the papers. "Excellent," I said, collecting the documents. "Now, I believe you all have some phone calls to make and some packing to do. This meeting is adjourned." As they filed out of the motel room, broken and defeated, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Not happiness exactly, but a sense that justice had been served and the truth had finally been told. Becca was packing up her equipment, shaking her head in amazement. "Joel, that was intense. Are you okay?" "I'm better than I've been in a long time," I said. "Honestly, sometimes you have to burn everything down to see what's really worth saving." She paused at the door. "What are you going to do now?" I looked out the window at the fog rolling in from the bay, obscuring the lights of Millbrook like a curtain falling on the final act of a play. "I'm going to rebuild my life," I said. "But this time, I'm going to build it on truth instead of lies." The Millbrook Literary Cafe had new management, and the gossip had finally died down to a manageable level. I sat at my usual table, reading the morning paper and enjoying Sam's coffee, which had improved considerably since he'd bought the place from the previous owner. "Morning, Joel," Sam said, refilling my cup. "How's the inspection business?" "Booming," I replied honestly. Turns out that being known as a guy who exposes lies is good for business when you're in the truth-telling profession. Through the window, I could see the marina where my sailboat was moored. I've been spending a lot of time on the water, lately, rediscovering the peace that came from being alone with the wind and the waves. Gray had indeed left town that night, selling his house to a nice family from Boston, who actually appreciated the community they'd moved into. The last I'd heard, he was working for a small consulting firm in Florida, keeping a much lower profile. Leia's husband had indeed divorced her, and she'd moved back to her hometown in Vermont. Her departure had effectively ended the book club. Though I'd heard rumors that some of the remaining members were starting a new group focused on actual books rather than social drama. As for Fiona, she'd moved to Portland and was working for a small literary agency. We'd had no contact since that night at the motel, and I preferred it that way. Some chapters of life are better left closed. Becca Morrison had parlayed her documentation of the affair and its aftermath into a successful podcast about small-town secrets. She'd changed the names and locations, but anyone from Millbrook could recognize the story. She'd sent me a check for my consulting work, which I'd donated to the local library. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Karen. Still coming for dinner Sunday? I typed back, wouldn't miss it. Life had settled into a new normal, one based on honesty and genuine relationships rather than social climbing and hidden agendas. I'd lost a wife and several friends, but I gained something more valuable, self-respect and the knowledge that I could handle whatever life threw at me. The fog was lifting from the bay, revealing a clear blue sky that stretched to the horizon. I finished my coffee, left money on the table for Sam, and walked outside into the morning sunshine. Millbrook was still a small town full of secrets, but they weren't my secrets anymore. I had my boat, my work, and my integrity. For now, that was enough. Have you ever had to expose a truth, even when it meant burning down your entire world? What's the most elaborate plan you've ever concocted to get justice? Tell me your story in the comments below.